Turning now to former President Donald Trump, he is making his third run for president.
He made that announcement last night from his Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida. In his more than hour-long speech, he took the opportunity to attack the current president and prop up his right-wing agenda. Here's the moment he announced his candidacy.
In order to make America great and glorious again, I am tonight announcing my candidacy for President of the United States.
CBS News political director Finn Gomez joins us now from Palm Beach, Florida. Hey there, Finn. So aside from the obvious announcement part of the speech, what really stood out to you from last night?
Lana, well, when we spoke to senior Trump advisors before the speech, they said that he was going to lay out this vision and that of his plan for this for his 2024 platform, and he did. He hit some of the key points. He talked about immigration, he talked about energy policy, he talked about inflation. But one of the things that really stood out to me, Lana, was the fact that he did not talk about what he did not talk about was the 2020 election. He has been relitigating the 2020 election since the 2020 election. Almost every rally, he's talked about the fraudulent claims of election fraud, claims made without merit. Almost every rally, he's alluded to it, but he did not reference it. He sort of made a veiled reference to it and then talked about overall voting reform. Also, Lana, it was the lack of enthusiasm. There were some people that we saw even trickle out. He did overwhelmingly, the people there were there to support him. There was a lot of Mar-a-Lago members. It was some family members. But overall, it was not this. It was somewhat of a lackluster speech, if you will, compared to maybe some of his other rallies. And there were some people missing, key people that were missing, including his son, Don Jr., and his daughter, Ivanka Trump, who said it following the event, following the speech, that she put out a statement saying that she was going to be staying out of the quote political arena for this one. So that's what really stood out to me.
That was interesting.
It's remarkable, Finn, because all of that speaks to the fact that things have shifted. The political world around Trump is not the same that it was even 2 years ago. And, I remember from covering him at the White House that he is at best a showman when he can show the unity he has, the support he has, and that didn't really seem to be there during this announcement, not to mention the weakness of the Republican Party, thanks in large part to his direct support of candidates who then lost. So how do you see that dynamic playing out? There's, leadership battles, there's the Trump wing of the party, there are other folks in the GOP who now want to distance themselves from him. How will that affect his race for president?
Well, I very much do remember our times together covering the White House.
A lot of time Mar-a-Lago,
under former President Trump in that tiny little White House booth. But honestly, that's a great question, Errol, because right now you are seeing this division where you have still this MAGA base, this loyalty to the former President Trump. Probably about 30% of the base is very supportive still of the president. But following the disappointment, the underperformance by the Republican Party these past midterm elections, there's been a shift. There's been an erosion of the power that the former president has on the Republican Party. Look, he's still a dominant figure, and, but it started to slide. And one name keeps popping up. I just spoke to some people who are attending the RGA, people who are members of staff for other Republican governors. But one name keeps rising, and that is Ron DeSantis, the Florida governor, of course, the governor here who won decisively about a week ago. And he is someone who is also eyeing a 2024 bid. And if you juxtapose, Errol, Trump's speech from last night to what I've heard from sources have told me from DeSantis' speech last night around the same time, only 200 miles away in Orlando at the RGA annual conference, there was a difference. I was told that there was like a real big enthusiasm. He was given like a hero's welcome and even a standing ovation, discussing really his win, his historic win with gains with Latino independents and women voters.
And we've also seen some donors making that transition as well.
Right.
All right, Finn, thank you so much.
Thank you, Finn.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.